They stole my clothes. Please help me," cried the trembling black woman as she emerged from the lake waters, her voice echoing across the Arizona wilderness, while three young men rode away, laughing at their cruel prank. The townsfolk of Dusty Gulch see her kind as nothing more than drifters, meant to disappear quietly into the desert when faced with their scorn. They assume she'll vanish by morning, another broken soul crushed by the West's harsh judgments. But when the gruff mountain man hears her desperate plea, his reluctant act of mercy pulls him into her fight for survival. Hidden beneath her humble appearance lies legal documentation that could topple the corrupt cattle baron who controls their territory. Yet claiming her birthright means facing a powerful enemy who has destroyed families to protect his stolen empire. Will their unlikely alliance expose the truth? Or will they both be buried with the secrets that could set an entire community free? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as they rolled away from Ada Johnson. She stood alone on the dirt road leading into Dusty Gulch, clutching her worn leather satchel and a carefully folded teaching contract. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on her dark skin as she walked toward the cluster of wooden buildings that would be her new home. Ada had traveled 300 miles to reach this frontier town. The school board's letter promised fair wages and a classroom of eager children. What they hadn't known when they hired her through correspondence was the color of her skin. The first person to see her was the general store owner. His welcoming smile vanished the moment he looked up from sweeping his porch. He stepped backward into his doorway and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the dusty street like a gunshot. Ada's stomach tightened, but she pressed forward. She had faced this reaction before in other towns. Sometimes persistence paid off. Sometimes it didn't. 3 members of the school board waited inside the small courthouse. Their faces turned ashen when Ada introduced herself. The eldest man, wearing a wrinkled suit, cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Johnson, there seems to be some confusion about your appointment." Ada pulled out her teaching credentials and the signed contract. "No confusion, sir. Binding. I fulfilled my obligations by arriving on the specified date. Miss, you need to understand how things work in this territory." Ada understood perfectly. She had hoped this time would be different. She gathered her documents and walked toward the door. "I'll be staying at the boarding house until this matter is resolved." The boarding house owner took one look at Ada and shook her head. "We don't have any rooms available. The sign outside says otherwise. Sign's old. Been meaning to take it down." Ada walked from business to business. Each door closed in her face. Each excuse grew thinner than the last. The sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red. She had nowhere to sleep and no money for the return stagecoach. Exhausted and defeated, Ada remembered seeing a small lake on her walk into town. She needed time to think and clean the dust from her journey. The water might provide some comfort before facing another night of rejection. The lake sat hidden behind a cluster of cottonwood trees, peaceful and isolated. Ada checked the area carefully before removing her traveling dress and undergarments. She folded them neatly on a large rock near the water's edge, along with her precious satchel containing her teaching documents. The cool water soothed her aching feet and dust-covered skin. For the first time in days, Ada allowed herself to relax. She closed her eyes and tried to plan her next move. Maybe the territorial capital would have opportunities. Maybe she could find work as a seamstress or cook. Loud laughter shattered her moment of peace. 3 young men on horseback emerged from the trees, whooping and hollering like wild animals. Ada's heart raced as she sank deeper into the water, trying to hide herself. The tallest rider, barely out of his teens but built like a man, spotted her folded clothes. He dismounted and grabbed the entire pile, including her satchel. "Look what we found, boys." Someone's trespassing on our swimming hole. Ada's voice caught in her throat. Please, sir. Those are my belongings. The young man grinned wickedly. This is private property. Trespassers forfeit their possessions. I meant no harm. I'll leave immediately if you return my things. Cupped her hands around her mouth and called out toward the empty landscape. Her voice cracked with emotion and fear. They stole my clothes. Please help me. Someone, anyone, please help me. The words echoed off the canyon walls and faded into silence. Ada shivered in the cooling water, wondering if she would die in this forgotten place, another casualty of a world that refused to see her humanity. Then she heard the sound of approaching footsteps crunching through the dried grass. A tall figure emerged from the cottonwood trees. The man moved with the quiet confidence of someone who lived alone in dangerous territory. His weathered face showed surprise at finding Ada in the water, but his eyes held no cruelty. Silas Tanner had been tracking deer when he heard the woman's desperate cry. He stopped at the water's edge and turned his back to give her privacy. Ma'am, I heard you calling for help. Ada's voice shook with cold and fear. 3 men on horses stole everything I own. My clothes, my papers, my money. Everything. Silas shrugged out of his heavy coat without looking toward the water. He held it behind him. This should cover you decent enough. My cabin's about a mile through those trees. Ada swam closer to shore and quickly wrapped herself in the warm coat. It smelled of wood smoke and leather. Thank you, sir. I don't know what I would have done. Can you describe the men who robbed you? The leader was tall, maybe 20 years old. Brown hair, expensive boots. The other 2 were younger. Silas's jaw tightened. Clayton Pritchard and his friends. Should have known. He began walking toward the trees. Come on, we need to get you somewhere safe before full dark. Ada followed him through the wilderness, struggling to keep up with his long strides. The oversized coat dragged on the ground, but it provided blessed warmth against the cooling desert air. Silas's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. The structure looked solid and well-maintained, built by someone who understood survival. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over simple furniture and shelves lined with books. Ada noticed a military uniform. When she emerged, Silas had prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate in comfortable silence. Ada noticed Silas watching her carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle. What brought you to Dusty Gulch? He asked finally. I was hired to teach at the school. The board changed their minds when they saw me. Silas nodded grimly. Figured as much. This territory isn't welcoming to folks who look different. Ada straightened her shoulders. I have legal credentials and a signed contract. They can't simply dismiss me without cause. Law and justice aren't always the same thing out here. After dinner, Silas examined the damaged dress Ada had been wearing. He held up the torn fabric, looking for ways to mend it. A hidden pocket had been ripped open during the theft. There's something still in here. Silas pulled out a folded paper that had been wedged deep in the pocket seam. Ada gasped. I forgot about that. It's a land deed I inherited from Mrs. Wellington, the woman I cared for before she died. Silas unfolded the document carefully. His eyes widened as he read the legal description of the property boundaries. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a territorial map. According to this deed, you own 320 acres of prime land. Silas traced the boundaries with his finger, including the lake where those boys found you. Ada moved closer to study the map. That's impossible. Mrs. Wellington said it was worthless desert property in Arizona territory. This land includes water rights and grazing areas. It's some of the most valuable property in the region. Silas looked up from the map with serious eyes. Do you understand what this means? I'm not sure I do. Big Jim Pritchard has been running his cattle on this land for years. He built his wealth on property that legally belongs to you. Ada stared at the deed in disbelief. Are you saying I own the land where the richest man in town grazes his herds? That's exactly what I'm saying. This document makes you one of the largest landowners in the territory. The implications hit Ada like a physical blow. No wonder his son felt entitled to humiliate me at the lake. Around here can barely read their own names. Mrs. Wellington said knowledge was the only thing no one could steal from me. Ada held the deed firmly in her hands. She was wrong about one thing, though. They tried to steal this too. What are you planning to do? Ada looked at the map again, seeing her future spread across hundreds of acres of valuable land. I'm going to claim what's rightfully mine. The next morning, Silas saddled his horse while Ada prepared for the ride into town. She wore Sarah's dress with quiet dignity, the precious land deed secured in a new hiding place Silas had sewn into the fabric. Remember what I taught you about dealing with hostile folks, Silas said, as he helped her mount the horse behind him. Ada nodded. During their early morning conversation, Silas had shared stories from his war years. He had served as a military strategist, planning supply routes and defensive positions across dangerous territory. His unit had survived impossible odds through careful preparation and tactical thinking. You lost your wife while you were serving, Ada said softly. Cholera took her while I was fighting in Virginia. Came home to an empty house and a grave marker. Silas's voice carried old pain. Been living alone ever since. Figured I was meant to stay that way. What changed your mind? Silas glanced back at her. Meeting someone worth fighting for again. They rode into Dusty Gulch as the morning sun climbed higher. Townspeople stopped their activities to stare at the unlikely pair. Ada kept her back straight and her chin raised, despite the hostile glares. The town clerk's office occupied a corner of the courthouse. The nervous man behind the desk grew pale when Ada presented her land deed. This document appears irregular, he stammered. I'll need time to verify its authenticity. Ada pointed to the official stamps and signatures. Everything is properly notarized according to territorial law. You're required to process legitimate claims within 3 business days. Well, I suppose there might be complications with the surveying. Silas stepped closer to the clerk's desk. His presence filled the small office like a thundercloud. What kind of complications? The Pritchard family has been using that land for grazing. There might be disputes. Discuss your employment situation, the eldest board member said. My contract remains valid unless you can demonstrate breach of agreed terms. Ada didn't look up from her research. I've fulfilled every requirement specified in our agreement. Circumstances have changed since your arrival. The only change is your knowledge of my appearance. The contract makes no mention of physical characteristics as employment criteria. The man's face reddened. This town has certain expectations about its teachers. Ada finally looked up from her books. Then perhaps this town needs better expectations. That afternoon, Ada walked to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. A group of children played in the dusty yard, their laughter carrying across the desert air. When they saw her approaching, they stopped their games and stared. Are you really our new teacher? Asked a girl with pigtails. That depends on whether you want to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. The children exchanged excited glances. Several parents emerged from nearby buildings, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Ada introduced herself politely to each family. My children won't be taught by someone like you, declared a woman in an expensive dress. That's your choice, ma'am. But they're welcome in my classroom if you change your mind. By evening, Word reached Big Jim Pritchard about Ada's land claim. The cattle baron rode to Silas's cabin with his son Clayton and 2 ranch hands. Ada watched from the window as the 4 men dismounted near the front porch. "You harboring a troublemaker, Tanner?" Big Jim called out. Silas emerged from the cabin carrying his rifle casually across his arms. "I'm harboring a legal landowner who's filing legitimate claims. That woman has no right to property in this territory." Ada stepped onto the porch beside Silas. "I have every right granted by federal law and territorial statute." Clayton sneered at her. "You should have stayed gone after our little swimming lesson." "Your little swimming lesson was theft and assault. Both are criminal offenses." Big Jim's eyes narrowed. "You're making serious accusations, girl." "I'm stating legal facts, sir, and I'm prepared to defend them in court." The confrontation. "This is nothing compared to some things I've survived." 3 progressive families in town began allowing their children to attend Ada's informal lessons at the cabin. She taught reading and mathematics using materials she created from available resources. Word spread that the new teacher possessed remarkable knowledge and patience. Sheriff Ridley visited one evening, drawn by reports of the growing conflict. He found Ada teaching 5 children basic writing skills while Silas prepared dinner. "Heard there's been some trouble out here," the sheriff said. Ada showed him her detailed log of harassment incidents. Multiple violations of property rights and criminal mischief. Ridley read her careful documentation with growing respect. "You sure know your way around legal terminology." "Education is a powerful tool, Sheriff. Some people fear it more than guns." As autumn deepened, the battle lines became clearer. Ada had claimed her rightful property and refused to retreat. The Pritchards had built their empire on stolen land and wouldn't surrender without a fight. The town watched nervously, knowing that bigger conflicts were coming. Ada spent long hours in the courthouse records office, studying property documents with the intensity of a detective. Her legal training had taught her to look for patterns and inconsistencies. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The Pritchard family's land holdings didn't match the official territorial surveys. Boundaries had been altered on multiple deeds. Signatures appeared forged on several crucial documents. Most disturbing of all, she found records of families who had simply vanished from the territory after disputes with Big Jim. "Look at this." Ada showed Silas a collection of documents spread across the cabin table. The Martinez family owned 200 acres south of town. Their deed shows a sale to Pritchard, but the signature doesn't match their other legal papers. Silas studied the handwriting carefully. "You think it's forged?" "I'm certain of it." Mrs. Martinez signed her name differently on her marriage certificate and her children's birth records. Ada pulled out more files. The Chen family, the O'Malley brothers, the Jackson homesteaders. All sold their land to Pritchard under suspicious circumstances. All disappeared from the territory immediately afterward. How many families are we talking? Values. That represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen property. What are you planning to do with this information? Ada looked up from her research with determination burning in her eyes. "I'm going to find those families and help them reclaim what's rightfully theirs." Over the next week, Ada and Silas rode to neighboring settlements, following leads from her document research. In a small town 30 miles south, they found Maria Martinez working as a seamstress, barely surviving on meager wages. "Senor Pritchard said we had no choice but to sell," Maria explained through tears. "He claimed our deed was invalid because we were not citizens. His men made threats against my children." Ada showed Maria the forged signature. "This isn't your handwriting. You never legally sold your land. But we have no money for lawyers, no way to fight such a powerful man." "You have something better than money," Ada said. "You have the truth." They found similar stories throughout the territory. The Chen family had fled to California after their barn was burned down. The O'Malleys had been beaten by Pritchard's men and told to leave or face worse consequences. Each family possessed legitimate deeds that proved their rightful ownership. Ada began building a network of displaced landowners, sharing information and evidence through careful correspondence. She taught several families to document their cases properly, preparing them for legal battles ahead. "We need federal intervention," Ada told Silas as they reviewed the growing pile of evidence. "Territorial authorities are either corrupt or too intimidated to act." "How do we contact federal marshals without Pritchard finding out?" Ada had already considered this problem. "I'll send documentation to the territorial capital through multiple channels. Even if Pritchard intercepts some messages, others will get through." She spent 3 days preparing comprehensive legal briefs, documenting each case of fraud with meticulous detail. Her years of legal education proved invaluable as she crafted arguments that would stand up in federal court. The letters were smuggled out of town through sympathetic travelers and merchants. Ada gave each courier different portions of the evidence, ensuring that no single interception could destroy her case. Meanwhile, tensions in Dusty Gulch continued. Replied, "She taught me that knowledge could overcome any barrier." Reverend Matthews, the Progressive Methodist minister, also began supporting Ada's cause. He invited her to speak about education at Sunday services, despite complaints from some congregation members. "This young woman represents the best of Christian values," he declared from the pulpit. "She teaches our children with patience and wisdom. We should welcome her contributions to our community." However, Ada's growing support only intensified Pritchard's hostility. His men began riding past the schoolhouse during lessons, making threatening gestures toward the children. Several families received anonymous warnings to remove their children from Ada's classes. One evening, Clayton Pritchard and 3 friends surrounded the cabin while Ada was teaching her evening adult literacy class. They shouted threats and fired shots into the air, trying to terrorize the students. Silas emerged with his rifle, but the damage was done. Several adults fled and never returned to classes. "They're escalating because they're getting desperate," Silas observed. Ada nodded grimly, "Which means our evidence is probably reaching the right people." 2 weeks later, their suspicions were confirmed. A stranger arrived in town asking questions about property records and land disputes. Big Jim's informants quickly reported the federal investigators' presence. That night, Big Jim Pritchard visited the cabin with 6 armed men. Ada and Silas watched from behind barricaded windows as the riders formed a circle around their home. "Time to end this peacefully," Big Jim called out. "Hand over whatever documents you've been collecting, and we'll let you leave the territory unharmed." Ada stepped onto the porch with quiet dignity. "The evidence has already been submitted to federal authorities. Destroying us won't stop what's coming." "You have no idea what you've started, girl." "I know exactly what I've started," Ada replied. "Justice." Big Jim's men dismounted and took positions around the cabin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the clearing as the standoff began. Ada and Silas had prepared for this moment, knowing that Pritchard would eventually resort to direct confrontation. "Last chance to cooperate," Big Jim shouted. "Surrender those documents and leave the territory today." Ada held up her original deed. "This document predates all your forged claims." Big Jim's face darkened with rage. He gestured to his men, who began moving closer to the cabin. "Burn them out." Before anyone could act, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. A group of riders emerged from the tree line, led by Sheriff Ridley and a man wearing a federal marshal's badge. Marshal Thompson rode directly into the center of the confrontation. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the standoff. Behind him rode Dr. Warren, Reverend Matthews, and 6 other prominent townspeople. "Federal Marshal Thompson," the lawman announced. I'm here investigating reports of land fraud in this territory. Big Jim's men lowered their weapons nervously. Federal intervention meant their local protection wouldn't help them. Marshal, this is a private property dispute, Big Jim said, trying to sound reasonable. According to my investigation, this is a criminal matter involving forged deeds and intimidation of legitimate landowners. Marshal Thompson dismounted and approached Ada. Are you Miss Johnson? Yes, sir. I submitted the documentation regarding systematic land fraud. Your evidence has been thoroughly reviewed by federal attorneys. They found it compelling enough to warrant immediate investigation. Ada felt a wave of relief wash over her. Months of careful research and preparation had finally reached the right authorities. Marshal Thompson turned to address Big Jim directly. James Pritchard, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and intimidation of federal witnesses. This is ridiculous. I built this ranch through honest work. Your honest work involved forging at least 20 land deeds and driving legitimate owners from their property. The marshal produced a set of warrants. We also have arrest warrants for your son Clayton and 3 associates for assault and theft. Clayton tried to mount his horse and flee, but Sheriff Ridley blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, son. I didn't do anything wrong. We were just having fun at the lake. Ada stepped forward with quiet authority. Theft of personal property and assault are not fun, Mr. Pritchard. They're crimes with consequences. The crowd of townspeople watched in amazement as the Pritchard empire crumbled. Transformation was remarkable and swift. Marshal Thompson addressed the growing crowd. Federal investigators will be reviewing all land transactions in this territory over the past decade. Legitimate property owners will have their rights restored. Ada pulled out a carefully prepared list from her notebook. Marshal, I've documented 15 families who were fraudulently driven from their property. Most are still alive and willing to testify. Your research will be invaluable in making these cases. The federal government takes land fraud very seriously. As the Pritchards were led away in custody, the immediate threat to Ada and Silas disappeared. However, the broader work of restoring justice was just beginning. School board members approached Ada with formal apologies and a renewed teaching contract. We hope you'll consider staying in Dusty Gulch permanently, the eldest member said. That depends on whether this community truly wants to change. We do. Your courage has shown us what real leadership looks like. That evening, families throughout the territory received news that their stolen lands would be returned. Maria Martinez wept with joy when a federal messenger delivered official notice that her family's ranch was being restored. The Chen family began making plans to return from California. The O'Malley brothers started their journey back from Oregon. Dozens of families who had given up hope now saw the possibility of reclaiming their futures. Ada and Silas stood on their porch as the sun set over the desert. The land that had been stolen and fought over would finally serve its rightful owners. What happens now? Silas asked. Now we build something better. Ada looked out over the territory that would soon welcome back its displaced families. We create a community based on justice instead of corruption. Silas took her hand gently. I never thought I'd find purpose again after the war. Sometimes purpose finds us when we're ready to see it. The federal investigation would take months to complete, but the immediate crisis had passed. Ada's courage in documenting the truth had exposed systematic corruption and restored hope to countless families. As stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Ada and Silas began planning their future together. Their love had grown from shared struggle into something strong enough to build a new life upon. The woman who had once stood helpless in a lake, 22 children from diverse backgrounds. Mexican-American children sat beside Irish immigrants. Former slaves learned alongside the sons and daughters of established ranchers. Miss Johnson, I finished my reading assignment, announced little Sarah Chen, whose family had returned from California after their land was restored. Excellent work, Sarah, Would you like to help Tommy with his letters? The federal investigation had concluded with sweeping changes throughout the territory. Big Jim Pritchard received a 10-year prison sentence for fraud and conspiracy. Clayton served 6 months for assault and theft, emerging from jail a humbled young man who now worked honestly at the general store. 15 families had reclaimed their stolen properties. The Martinez Ranch flourished again, with Maria's children attending Ada's school. The O'Malley brothers rebuilt their homestead and opened a successful lumber mill. Each restored family added strength to the growing community. Ada's own property had become the foundation for something unprecedented in the territory. She had donated 50 acres for the construction of a proper town center, complete with school, library, and community meeting hall. The original Dusty Gulch had transformed from a corrupt frontier settlement into a model community that attracted settlers seeking opportunity and justice. The territorial governor visited twice, praising the town's progressive approach to education and land management. At noon, Ada dismissed her morning students and welcomed the adult learners who came for literacy classes. Former slaves, immigrants, and working people who had never learned to read filled the classroom with determination and hope. "Today we're studying contract law," Ada announced to her adult class. "Knowledge protects you from those who would take advantage." Her teaching methods had gained recognition throughout the territory. Other communities requested her assistance in establishing schools. The Territorial Education Department offered her a position overseeing curriculum development for the entire region. After classes ended, Ada walked to the construction site where Silas supervised the building of additional classrooms. Their marriage, 3 months earlier, had been celebrated by the entire community. Even former opponents had attended the wedding, recognizing Ada's contributions to their shared prosperity. "The new wing should be finished by fall," Silas reported. "We'll have space for 40 more students." Lives had been restored. The correspondence painted a picture of widespread positive change. Maria Martinez had written to share news that her eldest son had been accepted to university in Phoenix. The Chen family's farm produced the finest vegetables in the territory. Even the O'Malley brothers had learned to read through Ada's adult education program. "Letter came from the territorial capital today," Silas said, handing Ada an official envelope. Ada opened it carefully. Inside was an offer to become the first territorial director of rural education, overseeing school development across Arizona territory. "They want me to travel throughout the region, establishing schools and training teachers. It's a remarkable opportunity." Ada folded the letter thoughtfully. "It would mean leaving our community just as it's becoming everything we hoped for. Or it would mean sharing what we've built here with people who need it just as desperately." That night, Ada walked alone to the lake where her journey had begun. Moonlight danced on the water that had once reflected her desperation. Now the same view filled her with profound satisfaction. She thought about the woman who had stood naked and terrified in this water, crying for help from an indifferent world. That woman could never have imagined the transformation that lay ahead. The sound of approaching footsteps brought her back to the present. Silas joined her at the water's edge, understanding her need for reflection without requiring explanation. "I've made my decision about the territorial position," Ada said. "And I'm going to accept it. This community is strong enough to continue growing without us. Other places need what we've learned here." Silas nodded with pride. "Sarah would have loved seeing what you've accomplished. She's part of everything we've built. Her dress gave me dignity when I had nothing. Her memory inspired your kindness to a stranger." They stood together in comfortable silence, planning their next adventure. The work of building just communities would never be finished, but it would continue through the teachers Ada trained and the schools she established. A year later, Ada stood before another lake in a different territory, watching construction begin on a new schoolhouse. This community faced the same challenges Dusty Gulch had overcome. Corrupt officials, displaced, trained. Every family she helped represented another victory against those who profited from ignorance and injustice. The ripples of change continued spreading across the territory, carrying Ada's legacy to places she might never see, but would always influence.